everybody. Hello and welcome to another one of our Data Idols lightning talk sessions. And they come around really quickly, and I do always end up looking forward to them, but they sneak up, man. They sneak up. So in terms of today's session, really looking forward to it. As I say, we're joined by Matt Taylor, who's a principal data architect at Trainline. As you can see, talking about that journey from IC to manager and back again, the learnings from a squiggly career. I've got loads of questions already. My career's been a little bit squiggly, so I'm potentially an expert when it comes to the Q&A. But as ever, this is an interactive session. So if you do have questions, please do put them into the Q&A section. The chat is also open, so again, feel free to say hello. Matt's a friendly guy. We're both very friendly guys, so we're keen to hear from you. If you're watching along, do say hello. Just before I invite Matt on, the only thing that I'm just going to shout out is, and I was chatting with Matt beforehand, is we are always looking for people who have something to share. So, if you have something that you'd like to discuss, particularly focused on that sort of talent, people, career growth type space, we'd love to hear from you. We're definitely keen to keep doing these. So yeah, definitely do reach out if that's of interest. In terms of today's session, Matt, if I can ask you to join me on stage, my man, come and say hello to the people at home. So
Hi.
hey Matt, how are you doing today?
Hi, Dave. Good, thanks. How's everyone? Happy to be here.
I reckon everyone's good, man. So give us a little thumbs up. So we've got Jess in the chat straight away. Jess is our community director. She's just come back from maternity leave. So it's great to see Jess back in the audience. But yeah, anyone else, give us a little wave. Let us know where you are, and we'll say hello. In terms of today's session, I'll maybe stop sharing my screen now, and maybe get you to share your presentation, Matt, if that's
Sure,
okay.
I can do that.
And we can get going from there. Man, that was slick. Hey, seamless,
So we do it, right?
ready for it, ready for it. Awesome. So yeah, screen's looking good, Matt. As mentioned, open to questions at the end. We have Shrini joined us from Dallas, Texas, by the way, there, Matt. We've gone global straight away. You're not messing about today.
Isaac.
So yeah, screen's looking good, man. I'll hand over to you. Q&A is open, and we'll come back for questions at the end. So over to you, Matt, and I'll catch you at the end.
Great. Well, thanks again, Dave, for the opportunity to come and talk to the community. My first time doing this, so I'm excited to see how it goes. And keen to get into the chat with everyone as we go through it. As I've said, my name's Matt. I'm the principal data architect at Trainline, and I'm going to talk about my experiences over my career, moving from IC to manager and then going back in the other direction as well. So just kind of going to give you my perspectives on that, things that I've experienced, things that I think are important. And if anyone's kind of thinking about making any change along these lines, then hopefully there's something in here that can help you understand and make those sort of decisions. Great. So today I'm going to cover a few different things. So I'll talk about my career path, kind of what got me here, give you a bit of background on that. And then I'll give you my take on the IC and manager roles and kind of what's different about those. I'll talk through my move from IC to manager, some of the things that I found challenging and some of the opportunities that I saw doing that. And then also I've moved back from manager to IC. So I'll talk about how that was as well and how that's sort of different from going in the other direction. And then I'll finish out just kind of giving my thoughts on ways that you can choose direction if you're thinking about any of these things as well. But yeah, keen to kind of get into the conversation as well. So let's start off then. So I'll talk about my career and what has got me to this point. So, as the headline suggests, I think, I've had a relatively squiggly career. Not super unusual. I've worked at a few different places, but I started my career in Australia, where I'm from, working for the government. And since then, I've also worked in financial services, health, music industry, consulting, big tech, startups, and now in e-commerce at Trainline. So I've sort of seen a lot of different things. I've worked primarily as a data engineer, software engineer throughout my career. So very focused on that sort of engineering side of the data world. But I've worked with people from all parts of the data and software industry. So I've sort of seen lots of different perspectives on that. I think most of my career I've spent as an IC. So I've done most of the time doing the work, building things, creating new things. Um, coming up with from SQL Server through to big data technologies, Spark and Hadoop and all the things that we sort of do now. And I've always had a team leadership sort of aspect to my role, typically found myself in, but hadn't really done any formal management until I was at Facebook, where I became a manager after a few years as a data engineer IC. So that was where I sort of formally became a manager and where I had to learn about the differences really between being an IC and a manager. And then after that, I left Facebook to go join a startup to head up data engineering function. And it wasn't a great time for startups, so probably won't talk too much about that one. But fortunately, I was able to make the move back to IC here at Trainline. So that's kind of the direction that I took. When I first started out, I really thought there was a straight line path. You start doing the work, you get better, become more senior, become a manager, you become a senior manager, et cetera, et cetera. And that's sort of the picture that I had for how a career should work. And certainly over the time that I've been working, that perspective's changed for me. And having gone through these different moves, I've definitely got a really different perspective on that now. So we'll talk a bit more about that now as we go through. Before I get into it, though, just so I'd mention these books, particularly when I was looking for a new role after going to this startup, I was kind of wrestling with the idea of moving back into an IC role. And sort of reading these books really helped me get some perspective and understand like there's lots of different ways of thinking about this. Um, I really like the title of the squiggly career. As you can tell, that's sort of inspired the title for this talk, but Pathless Past was one I found first. If you're thinking about any of this stuff, like really recommend go and read these books. They're really helpful and can kind of give you another take on things as well, even beyond what we're going to talk about today. All right. So I'm going to talk now about like my take on IC versus manager roles. This will be my perspective based on working in data engineering, but I've worked with, a lot of data scientists, product managers, etc. So kind of, I think a lot of this will apply to most roles, at least within our community. But just kind of take it from that perspective that this is my experiences so far. All right, so I think there's probably three major dimensions to the sort of, the work that we do, the roles that we have, especially when we're working for companies. And I think this is a reasonably good summary of them. So up the top, you've got the work that you do, so the purpose of being there. You've got the team who does the work, the people that are kind of taking care of it, and then how you do it. So that's the process, the technology, etc. And from my experience, when you're an IC, you start your career out, you're really focused on the work. You're there to do a job, you've got to achieve some things, you build some stuff, do analysis, creating tables, dashboards, pipelines, whatever the work kind of might be. And then as you become a bit more senior, you sort of start to move a little bit away from just thinking about the work. I think the direction you go in is that you go head towards this process, because I think what happens is you realize that there's only so much that you can do by writing code or writing queries or building things yourself. So you have to find good ways of doing it that can help you scale. So I think as a senior IC, you do start to head further in this direction. Even though you're still focused on achieving the work, you're more focused on how it's done as well, as a way of scaling your own contributions. So then when you think about the manager role, ideally the manager in theory should probably sit right in the middle of all these three things, because we sort of get brought up with this idea that the manager is the person who knows everything and can easily move in between different aspects of the work and the role and kind of make sure that everything is going really well. And certainly what I found when I became a manager was that actually in practice, this people part is now the missing part of this triangle, where you've maybe got ICs really focusing on the work. You've got some senior ICs also helping out with how you do it. but no one's really focusing on the people, how, who's working on what, how they're developing, how are people building their careers. So what I sort of found was that even though in theory, maybe the perfect idea of a manager would be to be balanced between these things, that what happens is that you really have to focus on the people aspects of what's happening, and you do get pulled quite strongly in this direction. So, I think it was something that I found like very, very obvious when I became a manager, was that that was a huge part of the role, and became a really, really critical aspect of what I needed to take care of. So it's quite a big change. So in between these three things, and then obviously, life's not a perfect triangle. These are never going to look exactly like this, and everybody's experience will vary. But I think this kind of summarizes for me how I've experienced the different types of these dimensions, and how different people work together. So to me, these are the really big differences then between an IC role and a manager role. The first one on the skill set. So there's a really big difference that I found between the skills that you need as an IC and as a manager. So as an IC, you're really focused on doing the work, getting things done. And as a manager, you're really trying to get the best out of whoever you've got on your team, trying to find new people for your team. There's like it's a very different focus than what you had as an IC. And also when you're evaluating performance as an IC, you're looking for that direct impact. How have you made a change? How have you built something that's really improved the world in some way? Versus as a manager, you're not the one actually doing that stuff. So your impact is always going to be indirect through those people. And that's coming back to that idea of the people being the really critical part of this difference between these roles. On the other side of it as well, the scope really can change. So you go from things that you can solve yourself, or maybe with like one or two other people, cross-functional partners, across to something where you're solving really leveraged problems. They're scaled to the size of your department or your organization or whatever the sort of scope might be there. But you do really get a big step up in terms of the oversight and the scope of the type of problems that you're coming up against. So I at least found that these were the sort of the three major things. And, I'll go into some more detail later about when I was moving in between these different roles, what changed. But I think across the board, these were the three that really stood out to me, making that move. If you haven't read this book, Making of a Manager, if you're ever considering management, or you are a manager and you want to learn some more stuff about it, I think it's a really, really great book. And I think the summary here is good. And I sort of used the same words that Julie used in this book around purpose, people, and process, because I think they're a good summary. But essentially, it's sort of reiterating the idea that instead of your job being to do the work, it's to get the best out of other people. And you're doing that mostly through influence, not through, telling people what to do, or forcing things, or doing it yourself. But yeah, really recommend that book as well if you're interested. I read a lot. I've got tons of book recommendations if anyone wants them. Um, of course, at this point, you might be wondering, like, okay, I see a manager. These are two things, but surely there's some other options, and absolutely there are other options. There's a few examples that I've got here. I spent a few years as a contractor when I was working in the music industry, so I know quite a bit about that world. But there's also consulting. You can go out as a consultant on your own. You can use your own experiences to help people. You could be an advisor and help leaders who are trying to make progress, or you could go start your own business. And I think the nice thing about these things is that you're not really bound into that world, that binary world of like IC manager. That certainly, I guess when I first started working, as I mentioned, it felt like those are the options available. I think these have always been there, but they were kind of, I had to learn about them as I went, and over time they're becoming more and more prevalent in the market. And you see a lot more people going down these paths as well. And the nice thing about them is that you could kind of go either direction with these. You could be an IC or you could be a manager. And especially if you think about starting your own business, if you're a founder, when you start that business, you're an IC, you're doing the work, you're taking care of things. And as you grow and scale that, then you start to become maybe more of a manager, thinking about how you can do that through other people. So there are always other options. There's not only two ways to do this. I think that I'll go into sort of some thoughts about how to choose in between these three pathways later on, but it's definitely worth remembering that it's not just all about like IC and manager. That's not the only ways to do this. So when I made the move from IC to manager, as I said, I was working at Facebook. I'd been an IC for most of my career up until that point. I was a data engineer, and I'd sort of had taken on a role as a tech lead in the team, and had been trying to sort of do some more leadership aspects to my role. And there was an opportunity that came up for me to become a manager, and I was really excited about it. It's something I'd been thinking about for a while. I did really want to do it, and I wanted to move from the IC role to that manager role. I felt like I had a lot to contribute, and really wanted to kind of come and make a difference and work with people and help other people to improve. So I really jumped at that chance, and I think it was my first time formally as a manager. So I didn't really know what to expect. I kind of knew, that you do a bunch of training and learning beforehand, but I think until you actually do it for real, it's kind of hard to really understand it. But I'm going to talk through a few of the things that I found challenging, and a few of the things that I've like found really exciting about that. Um, the challenges by no means were things that were, off-putting or anything like that for me. I think they were just things that were different or difficult to begin with. But once you sort of solve them and get through them, they can really add a lot of value to what you bring as a manager. So I'm going to talk about 5 challenges to start with, and then I'll talk about a couple of opportunities as well, at least from my perspective of moving from IC to manager. So first one, letting go of doing the work. If you've been working as an IC and you move to become a manager, kind of in the same function or in the same area, you're going to have to make that transition from, hey, I'm the one who knows how to do this the best, to someone else is going to be doing that work. And that can be really difficult. Um, I found it like a little bit difficult, but overall, I think this one was okay for me personally, because I was really excited about the possibilities of being a manager, and I went into it knowing that that's what I wanted to try to do, is to start to let go of doing some of those things and find out more about managing the people side. But it's definitely a really big thing. A lot of people talk about this one. I think also managing peers is difficult. I had this situation, so I was in a team, I was working with people, and then I became the manager for a few of them to begin with, and then over time managed a much bigger team. But I think some people get quite concerned about this one. It really depends on the relationship you have with those peers and how they're going to see it. I had a great experience on this one. I think trying to manage people that you used to work with, it maybe could go either way. So probably worth really trying to think about that. But it probably guides maybe a decision if you wanted to become a manager, whether you do it inside a team that you're part of, or whether you try to look for an opportunity with people that you don't already know. But it's certainly something that can be a bit of a challenge. Also managing performance. So if you're used to evaluating your own performance or giving feedback to people, the overall idea of performance probably isn't too much of a stretch. But when you have to manage other people's performance, that can be a little bit more challenging as well. Particularly, say, if you're in a room full of other people who've been doing this for a while, you go into the big sessions with other managers where you're evaluating people, and you have to think about the role and the contributions that people are making in a really different way. So I think there's worth like that. It's a bit of a mindset shift, I think, that you have to make from thinking about your own performance to the broader performance of your team. And then to go with that, you have to find the right balance between delivery for your team and helping people grow. And sometimes those two things go together really nicely, and sometimes they don't, and you kind of have to choose between them. When I became a manager, for me, I really wanted to focus on the people side of things. I was working with a team, very capable people who could take care of their own delivery. So I didn't have to kind of, go in and get too hands-on in terms of deciding what they should be working on and all that kind of thing. But a lot of companies are different. You might find that if you become a manager, you're expected to know how to choose the work that's going to be done, set roadmaps, etc. And you need to find, it might take some time, but you need to find that balance between making sure your team is humming and delivering what they need to, but also then, helping people grow and develop, which is a really key part of being a good manager versus just being someone who tells people what to do. And of course, everyone's favorite imposter syndrome, I think, comes up because of all these things that I've just talked about as well, where, you're going into a new role, there's a different mindset, you're changing the way that you're thinking about things. You might have to start managing people that you've been working with. You're in a room full of other managers, you know what they're doing. So all these things kind of came together for me personally when I became a manager. And the key thing to get me through it was to have support from other managers and people that I could talk to, because it can be quite a scary moment, I think, moving into a different role. So having said that, of course, there's always things that are exciting and energizing when you think about the role, and the real things that you're going to get passionate about. So some examples of that is ways to scale yourself. If you've been doing the job for a while, maybe you're really awesome at it, and this is a chance for you to help other people to learn from you or to do things that you couldn't possibly do on your own, where you're going to have other people to sort of help you do that as well. Also, as I said, helping people grow. If you're passionate about that and you can see ways of helping other people understand the role or the work or whatever it might be, this is a really impactful way of doing things as a manager. And the other bit that I found personally, I'm a sort of generally a big picture person, so I found it really, really good to get more context about the company, the things that people are working on. I think when you're an IC, you get this perspective that the managers know everything. And to some extent, I think managers do know more than ICs because you do have to kind of operate at a different level. But it does mean you get a lot more clarity about things that are next to your role or different parts of the business or the work that's going on. And I think that's really exciting. If you like that kind of thing, then you can kind of get much of a better sense of what's happening in the company more broadly. All right. So, as I said, I moved from IC to manager when I was at Facebook. I left Meta as it became as a manager. I went to start up the data engineering organization in a startup. I went there to sort of build that out and help make the most of data engineering there. And then when that didn't quite work out very well, and I was looking for another role, I started to look around in the market. And at that time, so this is sort of early 2023, things weren't particularly great in the job market. And I started to think about, well, what are my options here? Is I could keep trying to look for manager roles, or maybe I should think about going to be an IC again. And I sort of had this weird perspective in my head that, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe that, I need to kind of keep moving up in the world and that kind of thing. And I think that period of time in particular really helped me to understand that that's not really how things work. And I'm really happy to have gone back into an IC role after that and to have that opportunity to kind of bring some of those perspectives back into a different environment. So I think the way that that played out for me, there's some challenges as well of going from being a manager to being an IC. I just talked about when you become a manager, you get more context. So the same thing happens in the other direction. When you go from being a manager and being able to get more context and understand things that are going on, you become an IC. You're naturally going to get less exposed to that context. There are meetings that happen. Managers have meetings with each other where they discuss things that are happening in the company. You don't get included in those meetings as an IC, so you have to work a bit harder to kind of understand it. And you might find that that feels a bit weird, you know, out of the loop or something like that, can kind of come up. But I think if you're conscious that that's probably what's going to happen, then it's something that you can handle okay. Also, you move into a world of no actual authority. So as a manager, I think, when I was a manager, I never felt as though I had like a ton of authority. I could just tell people what to do and they'd do it. I'm not sure that's how things work, particularly when you're working with professionals and good people. So, in practice, you've got to use influence quite a lot anyway. But, when you are a manager, people do think you got authority, and that does help you to do things differently than when you're an IC. And as an IC, the hints in the name, you're an individual. You're the one there trying to bring things to bear, and so you have to use influence. You don't have any paths to say, oh well, I know we disagree, but I'd like you to do it anyway. So you lack that sort of side of things. So all it means is you just got to lean on that influence skill set more, and make sure that you're developing relationships and being able to do that kind of thing as well. There was an idea that sort of went through my head definitely when I was considering this move from manager to IC, about, is this going to be a step backwards? Is this it's like a negative career growth moment for me? But when I thought about it more, I realized it just wasn't the case. And as I talked to different people, like, there definitely wasn't the case, at least sort of in the data field, in the technology industry. I don't think this is a massive problem. But I realize in some other industries that this could be more of a serious thing. So I think this one probably is a little bit dependent on context and situation. But I think being able to get past that idea that this is, a step backwards is a critical part if you want to move from being a manager to an IC. Because the way I see it is certainly not a step backwards. It's just another change of focus and change of direction that you can make in a career. Then, of course, there's technical skills. So depending on how long you've been not using your technical skills, this might be more or less difficult. I was manager for probably 4 or 5 years, but fortunately, I'd stayed quite close to the technology and kind of kept my skills up. So this one wasn't a big problem for me. But I realize if you've been a manager for a long period of time, maybe you haven't been using your technical skills for quite a while, that might be a bit harder. So, if you are considering a move from manager to IC, certainly worth keeping that in mind as you do that. And of course, imposter syndrome always there. You would sort of think that it would be worse going from IC to manager, but I think, again, for all these reasons here, um, it's also bad going from manager to IC, because you suddenly start to wonder, you're going to be able to contribute at the same level as other people who've been doing this then for their career. Is your influence going to work out? You're going to be able to make the right level of impact without having that extra context. So I think that it's certainly true that imposter syndrome kind of can be there no matter which direction you go in. Then, in terms of the things that are a bit more sort of energizing about it, thinking about this. So one of the good things about being a manager and then moving back to an IC is that you probably would have spent some time thinking about performance, which gives you a lot more clarity about the role. So as an IC, you can actually get a better understanding. And I definitely found that as I spent more time thinking about career performance and managing that kind of thing, it's like it really helped me understand the role in a lot more detail than I did when I was an IC before becoming a manager. So that's definitely something that I've noticed. And to go with that, a better understanding of where the opportunities are and how much impact something will have. And I definitely have a different perspective on that now after becoming a manager and then moving back to an IC role. Also true that, and I've talked to different people about this, and this seems to be, a thing that can happen, is that when you've been a manager, you've done that approach, you kind of know how things work from that perspective. When you become an IC again, you can kind of have this almost trusted advisor status where, your manager might know that, you've been a manager, you do understand it, so that there can be, different ways of thinking about your contributions as well. So this can be a really great way of getting some more upside from moving from manager to IC. All right, so I'm going to close out by talking about how I think about, how you can choose between these paths. Um, there's a lot of different options there, and depending on how you think about the different roles in your career and how things are going, it can be easier or harder to understand. I definitely really thought my path went, IC to manager and then continued to grow in that way. And when I realized that that wasn't the only way to do it, it sort of opens up the world to so many different possibilities as well. So if you're feeling a bit like this, like, I don't know whether I want to become a manager, maybe you're a manager and you're like, oh, maybe I want to be an IC again, or maybe neither of those things are good for you. And you kind of like, oh, actually, I want to go and do something totally different. I think that there's lots of different ways to think about this. Um, I'd say that there's bad reasons to choose, and these are two really bad ones. So if you're making choices just for more money or because you think you're going to have power and tell people what to do, these are not great reasons to move, and they're probably more relevant going from IC to manager. But depending on your situation, they could be in the other direction as well. I think the reason they're bad to choose, other than the obvious, like I think everyone kind of knows this anyway, but the reality is once you land into a role, presumably if you're getting more money or more authority, it's because that the company or the people you're working with think that you can do more or bring more value to the party. So if you kind of just do it for the money or the power, but you're not actually interested in the extra value, then it's not going to really work out very well. It's not going to last that long. So these are two really bad reasons to decide whether you want to move from IC to manager or do kind of anything really. The alternative is that you think about the strengths that you have. And I really like this framing of strengths that focuses on things that give you energy that you could get excited about, not just things that you're good at. So you might not even be particularly good at something, but you really love it, you're excited about it, you're passionate. That can really be a strength of yours as well that you could sort of start to develop. So the way I like to think about it is that if you love solving problems and getting things done and you just want to kind of get on with the work, solve those difficult problems, then probably an IC role is the best one for you to go for. If, on the other hand, the thing that excites you is growing other people, facing those organizational challenges, thinking about how to scale and kind of really work across big organizations, or you're just really focused on developing people, then a manager might be the right choice for you to go down. I think if you love choosing your own things and being really independent, then you might want to consider some of those other paths, which is contracting, consulting, advising, being an entrepreneur, start your own company. Um, but I think when you start to think about your own strengths and the things that give you energy, it can sort of help you to start to think about those different roles in different ways, beyond the sort of paycheck and the glory that you might be thinking about to begin with. And I'm just going to leave with this thought that overall, the best way for you to make these kind of choices is to focus on the value. Now, this is not just the value that you bring as an individual, but the value of the work that you do as a professional and the type of things that your team's there to do. So if a data team is there to help drive actionable insight or bring new information to a business or whatever the sort of real value that your team brings, that can then trickle down to you personally. And you can think about, how do you bring value to that mission? And are you going to be best to do that by doing the work, managing other people to do the work? Or do you need to go start your own business and change the world by building something that no one's ever seen before? So I think with that, I'm going to stop talking, at least for now, and hand back to Dave, and we can go from there. Thank you,
Amazing,
everybody.
amazing, man. Loved it. It says thank you on the screen, but if you're at home in the chat, I want to see a thank you. I want a thumbs up emoji. I want something. Yeah, let's let Matt know that people have enjoyed that. So, like, absolutely, great session. You've got a very good presentation style, man. I'm going to call it out. It was either this session or I feel like you could read books, like you could record a
Oh, nice.
podcast or something,
Okay,
man. It was very, very good, man. Very good. And we have got some questions
great.
coming from those watching along. Definitely keen for it to be interactive, guys. So, we're going to have a bit of a chat now with the time that we've got remaining. If more stuff's coming up, ping it in, man. Ping it in. Let us know. And we'll cover it off.
Great.
In terms of the chat, the Q&A, there's now 5 questions there. There is the ability to upvote questions as well. So if you haven't got your own question, but you like the look of someone else's, give it a little upvote. And actually, I'll maybe just view the questions by most upvoted, actually, Matt. So we'll fire through some of those. I've got a lot of questions myself. So brace yourself, man. I'll do my best to get through them all. Just before I do that, I will get quickly into the chat as well. So yeah, there was loads of emojis coming up on my screen, Matt. So hopefully you saw all of those come through
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
great.
But
Thank you, Rob.
Karen Stewart has given us a little heart emoji, a heart face emoji in the chat. Morris, great to
Beautiful.
see you, Morris. Morris is saying thanks so much. Robert, genuinely loved it. So clear and direct. Thanks. Robert is actually one of the people that's asked the question. Great question, Robert. So we'll be coming to that, man.
Great.
Morris has been mentioning books, which are the ones you mentioned. So that's great. We will definitely cover more chat on books. I'm like you, man. I do like a book. So we'll
Yeah.
get into all this stuff. But
Each of
I
those.
will start with the first question that's in the Q&A there. We've now got 9, which is a great start. So the most upvoted though is question from our very own Jess. So yeah, as mentioned before, welcome Jess, welcome back, Jess. But Jess is saying, what was it harder for you to move from IC to manager, or from manager to IC, and why? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of the amount of challenges that I personally found was probably the move from IC to manager. I think it was so different. The role was such a different thing than what I was used to. And even though I kind of knew in my mind what it would be like, until I did it, I didn't really understand completely. So I think that it was probably a more difficult one to move from IC to manager than back. I think, like, yeah, probably because coming back to IC, I sort of knew what to expect and I was excited about it, probably because, I had that different perspective and could look back and say, oh, actually, I think I could do a better job as an IC now that I've been a manager and have that take on it. So yeah, I think that was probably the tougher one.
Makes sense, totally. And that was actually similar to the first question I had in terms of talking about that difference in mindset.
Yeah.
Moving from an IC to a manager, and I guess part of that, I was thinking about it before the call, but it's like that shift in focus, and you touched on it in your presentation, the shift in focus from being an individual and individual output to
Mm.
output of the team and the management of the team. And so I guess, how did you find that shift in focus from individual output to team output? And I'm going to tag on one more because I hate it when people do that in the Q&A, but now I'm the boss, so I'm gonna go for it.
Do it, yeah.
But in terms of that change, so you had the change in mindset from individual output to team output, but I'm
Yeah.
guessing you also had to have that shift in communication
Mm.
style to get that output. So could you perhaps just speak a bit about that shift in mindset and then the communication style, if that's okay?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, yeah, the mindset shift was definitely a big one. So, you go from being the one who you can kind of go off and solve the problems and write code and kind of actually do the thing that solves the problem, to then, you need to kind of figure out how to get someone else to do that essentially. And particularly where, you might not be able to go to someone and say, hey, I want you just to do this. And you can't really tell them exactly how to do it or get too involved in it. So really what you're looking for is to try to get the idea of the outcome that you're looking for across to someone else. And so that's where the communication becomes really important, because instead of starting to talk about, oh, this is how you solve the problem, you've got to then be really clear about exactly what good looks like at the end, so that you can let that other person kind of do it, make their own mistakes, figure it out, and then help them learn as you go along. And then when you're talking outside the team about the work, when it's your work and you're doing it, you're very, very familiar with all the ins and outs of it. You can talk, for days about the the technical parts, the non-technical parts, and then as a manager, you're not going to be as close to the specifics as the person doing it. So you have to find good ways of representing other people's work in forums where they're probably not even in the room, and you've got to be able to kind of give the right perspectives on that work, either when you're discussing it or during performance time. This is like becomes really, really critical as well. So yeah.
Amazing, amazing, man. Thank you for that. I'm going to get back into the Q&A, because as I say, I should probably just jump in and ask all my own questions. The question at the top, from Robert, it caught my eye as it came in, actually, Robert. Great question. Robert's asking, do you feel like the natural cognitive aging process makes it ill-advised to continue as an IC? So basically,
See.
are you thicker
Yeah.
now, Matt, than you were when you finished uni? And are you worried about getting thicker as you get
Right.
older?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, as an IC, the thing I don't know that I worry about, and like I'm sure a lot of people worry about this, is you're always up against people coming through, starting their careers. They're hungry, they're excited, they're learning new technologies. Technology changes all the time. So how do you keep on top of that, and how do you even kind of make sure that you can keep doing that? And I think that's probably part of, yeah, as you get older, that gets harder, and you've already got a head full of stuff, and how do you kind of relearn and kind of come back to that? I think the counter that I would have to that, though, is that when you have all those experiences, I think the specifics become less important. So I think there's another question that I see there about keeping on top of new technologies when you switch back to IC. And I've found that as I move back, I'm sort of able to think about technologies in a lot less time than I probably took when I was doing it as an IC. So I think, like, yes, you probably can't learn totally new things as fast as you did when you started your career. But the fact that you have more experience, I think, means that you don't need to spend as much time, because it's not all totally new to you, and things start to come back around, and you recognize patterns, and you can see things, and you've tried stuff out that didn't work, and you've got good reasons for it. So I think you get a different take, and I think I touched on a little bit where I talked about when you go from being an IC to a senior IC as well, where you're more focused on, the way you do it, the process becomes more important. Your best practices start to come in, and you can start to contribute in other ways, and sort of, you almost start to scale out your own experience to other people without being a manager at that point, which can also
Yeah.
help. So yeah.
Mate, I like it. I like it. I must admit that was part of my journey actually. So I worked in tech for 12 years as a SQL DBA long time
Nice.
ago, and man, it was tough keeping on top of stuff. I'm
Yeah.
not going to lie. There's an okay DBA, but it was every year, man. You've got to keep
Yeah.
on and keep on, and yeah, obviously started my own business and took a different path. But yeah, I can completely understand that one. In terms of learning new stuff, I draw the line at TikTok. It's not happening. I'm
Yeah,
not
fair
doing it,
enough.
man. I'm
That's
not
fine.
doing it.
Yeah.
The next question at the top is from Luke Mellor. You'll know Luke very well
Oh, hey,
from
Luke.
Trainline. So, yeah, it's good to have Trainline represented. This is probably the point, Matt. I'm going to tee you up here. A
Mm.
Trainline hiring at the moment. Do you know?
Well, yeah, if you want to talk to Luke, he's the guy to talk to
Luke
about
Mellor.
hiring.
You hear that? For those at home looking to work at Trainline, drop
Yeah,
Luke a little message. But Luke's asking,
definitely.
do you miss any aspects of being a manager? And I assume there
Mm.
must be parts of it that you really enjoyed. And
Yeah.
what were the bits that you miss as a manager?
Yeah, so I know it's probably two bits. I think, like, the extra context you get as a manager, I personally found really rewarding, because I like to have that big picture perspective. So I think as a manager, you kind of just get exposed to that as a matter of course, because you need to be in those meetings and you need to get that context. Um, so as an IC, I can still get what I need to. Obviously, you don't get everything as an IC, but I can get as much context as I need to. I just got to ask the right questions. So I think, knowing that that was happening has helped me to probably do a better job of it as an IC. And then I think the other bit about it would be, um, oh, I've forgotten now what I was going to. There's that cognitive aging coming into play right there. I got too excited
Time for a
about it.
little nap, Matt.
Yeah,
Hey, get
exactly.
yourself a
Yeah, yeah.
cup of tea and a
Hold on.
biscuit,
Yeah,
mate.
perfect. Perfect. I'll come back to it if I
Mate,
remember.
we'll come back. We'll come back. I've got your back, mate. We're similar ages. It's all good. Luke's also in the chat telling me to behave. So yeah, as I mentioned, message Luke. Anyone interested?
Yeah,
Drop him. He loves to
exactly.
hear from people. Next question there from Rosemary. Again, it's a great one, and I must admit, it ties in quite nicely with one of my own questions. So I'm going to seamlessly put that in there. But
Mm,
Rosemary was, talking about what made you decide on a manager path,
mm,
rather than an IC to start with. What
yeah,
makes you go back? And I think one of the things that I was thinking about beforehand was how can someone assess whether they're better suited for a
mm,
management role,
yeah,
or they're better suited to remain as an IC. And I know you touched on it a bit towards the end about motivations and stuff like that. But if you could perhaps speak a bit to Rosemary's question there about what made you decide on your path, and
yeah.
whether there's any tips on assessing paths.
Yeah, and actually, I've just remembered the second bit I was going to say from Luke's question, because it's the same as this. So, I think, like, the reason that I really wanted to become a manager was I felt like I could help other people grow and develop more. So that's one of the things that I'm not a manager now, so I don't have to do that. But the way that I do that now is that I sort of do informal coaching with people in my team. So I work with ICs in my team and I just spend time with them and help coach them. And that was one of the real reasons why I became a manager in the first place, was that I really felt like I wanted to do that. And I really love solving all the technical problems and doing the work. But I was finding that I was really enjoying any of those kind of conversations I was having to help other people understand the role better, to understand the work better. So I think in terms of like choosing between the manager path and the principal path, I think, yeah, nowadays actually it's probably like less of a difference between those two things. And there's great companies that allow you to become a principal, like Trainline is one of them. And there's a bunch of other companies out there that are recognizing the fact that you don't have to be a manager to be a leader or a mentor, and coaching people you can do that regardless of whether you're a manager or not. So to me at the time when I became a manager, that was something that really inspired me about the role. And I was fortunate that that was a real big focus of that role at Facebook, that was kind of a big part of that. And I realized that's not the same everywhere. So I think it probably will depend on the situation that you find yourself in and the company you're in, whether that's an option. And yeah, really coming back to that thing of like what actually gets you excited about that role. And for me, it wasn't really about, oh, I want to tell people how to do a better job technically. It was really, how can you become a better data engineer in my case? Um, how can my team work better with data science, and how can we kind of all produce something that's much better by doing that together? Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Fantastic, man. Fantastic. We've got 7 questions in the chat, Matt. I'm going to make a bold statement. We're going to get to all 7. Okay. We've got about
All right,
12 minutes and we're going to bosh through them. So the question at the top there from LW, it's intriguing, isn't it? What are we saying? Lorraine? Lisa? Lawrence, LW, love to know who you are. Other than the books that you recommended in the talk, what other books would you recommend? Is there any other sources of information? Yeah, so for further reading, further learning, what would you recommend, Matt?
Yeah, so there's a couple that I find really good. So there's one called Outcomes Over Output, which is really short reads. Really recommend that to anyone, just to kind of help you tell the difference between doing the work and why you're doing it, kind of essentially. Um, there's another one. A lot of companies do OKRs now. It's kind of a thing that everyone's into. Um, there's one book that's called Radical Focus, which kind of doesn't sound like it would be anything about OKRs, but actually it was a really good way of explaining OKRs. It's sort of told as a bit of a story, so it helped me understand them a lot better, both as a manager and then as an IC. There's another book. Let me just remember the title exactly. Vin Vashista is the author, but it's called From Data to Profit, which is really about how companies can make better use of data and do all this sort of thing. Anyway, like I could probably come up with a big
Okay,
list of
what we're
anyone.
going to do, man, we'll make a list
Send it
and we
after.
know exactly who's here and we'll send an email
Great.
to everybody just with a bit of a list. I think that radical focus one I've actually read actually, and it was they were talking about selling tea.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's the story, wasn't it? But it was good.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
liked it.
trying
I
to work
liked
out
it
how
a
to
lot.
make
So
one.
happy
Yeah,
days.
good.
Question there from Gosha. Did your relationship with your peers change once you became a manager? Were they
Uh-huh.
a good bunch? Did they give you a hard time?
No, they were a really good bunch actually. And I think I was quite lucky, having a group of peers that were really supportive of that. I can see it would be difficult if maybe you were like in competition with someone for who's going to be the manager. I think that would be quite hard. Um, but for me, it was quite straightforward. I think probably it was more on my side where I had to really change my mindset and how I was relating to people in the team, where you do have to change the way that you talk to people and approach them. When you have that sort of responsibility for looking after their performance in particular is like the one that kind of starts to change the relationship, I think. Because
Yeah,
at the end of the day, you still
I
need
think
to
we
get.
could do a whole webinar on how to give feedback actually, because
Yeah,
yes, it's easy if it's great, isn't it? But
yeah, that's right. Yeah, those
so
are fun ones. Yeah, yeah, it's
cool,
so.
man. Cool. Great question, Gosha. Thank you. Question there from Danny. Do you struggle to see an obvious continued career development path within IC, now that you've moved back to IC. So I guess,
Yeah.
potentially speaking to your longer term plans, Matt,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, sharing, what do you think it looks like now that you've made that step?
Yeah, it's a really good question actually, because it does feel as though in a lot of places, sort of tops out somewhere. And I think probably in reality, if you wanted to be the CTO, CEO of a big company, you'd probably have to go down the management path. I don't think there's really two ways about that. But I think fortunately that's not the only option available to people anymore for if you wanted to become, really senior. And, if your company doesn't support it, there's other companies that do that you can think about, if you really wanted to stay as an IC and become a technical leader. And then, there's also these other routes that I talked about as well. So I think as an IC, personally, I feel like that opens up more options for you to go become a contractor, consultant, start your own business. If you're a manager and you always rely on other people to do things for you, then that might be harder, right? So if you're a founder, you don't know how to actually do stuff, you're gonna have to find people who can do stuff before you can make your idea come to life. So I don't like I get the question, and I really do think that in the past that it might have been a bit of a bad move and sort of a bit terminal as an IC. I think, yeah, you might not be able to reach the dizzying heights as an IC as you would as a manager in a bigger company, but I think there's so many other options now that I don't feel particularly concerned about it personally. Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Matt. As you were doing that, my man Morris has put a couple of those books into the chat. I want to give Morris a shout out as well. He's good to follow on LinkedIn or connect with on LinkedIn. He posts, I think he was posting every day for 100 days, but
Oh,
it
nice.
was not rubbish. It was thoughtful stuff. So yeah, give Morris a little look, everyone. Question there from Janice. What's the difference between an IC data scientist and a senior or lead data scientist? I guess in some organizations you can be a lead data scientist but still be an IC or a
Yeah.
senior and stuff like that. So perhaps could you just speak to what it may look like in different companies?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So, like, I haven't been a data scientist, but I work with a lot of them. So, just take my answer with with a pinch of salt, from that perspective. But my take on it is that as an IC data scientist, you might be there to do an analysis, and I'm sort of talking about data scientists in the terms of probably doing analysis more than say machine learning. So, if we differentiate between those two roles, so as an IC data scientist, maybe you're doing the analysis and you might be very technically good. So you can come up with approach that might have a particular type of statistical modeling, or you might know how to kind of come up with an answer to a particular problem. I think as you become more senior on the data scientist path, your role evolves more into, becoming an advisor and trying to push people in a different direction than they naturally would come on their own. And the best data scientists that I see just provide enough challenging thought back to leadership that they can actually genuinely change the direction of the company, um, by influencing, that really top leadership group within a company. So, yeah, I think that's probably a pretty high level difference, but there's sort of a level of maturity in terms of how much you're going to push something that is right in that data scientist role, and how much you partner with, say, product management in particular, to really drive vision, say if you're in a product company, to drive that forward as well.
Amazing, mate. Perfect. Thank you so much. We've got three questions left. We've got
All
five
right.
minutes. This is
Look at
easy, Matt. We've got this. Question at the top there from Chantel. Have you found workplaces that push you towards the manager route? This has been her perception in perhaps some of the places that she's worked, where you get pushed towards the manager route. If you want to become more senior, you want to make more money. IC roles tend to be a little bit more junior.
Mhm.
You mentioned in your presentation and in your answers previously, that's not the case everywhere. But can you speak to what your views are on that a little bit and what that might look like if you want to stay as an IC?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, totally accept that not every company is like this. And I think it's probably not even the majority of companies at the moment, but I do see it changing, quite a bit. So yeah, there are companies where management is the only way to kind of progress. And I think if you want to stay in that company or in that industry, that might be the only way to kind of do it. You do have to kind of go with what's available to you. Um, I think the role of management has changed quite a lot over the last few years. In particular, we've seen a lot of flattening out of management structures in tech companies, which kind of does change the nature of manager roles as well. But it also means there's fewer of them. So if you think about that, there's less manager roles, there's a lot of IC roles. Um, to me, that means that the pressure on making sure senior ICs can continue in companies is probably going to increase, would be my take on that, because there's not going to be scope to create everybody who wants to be a manager to become a manager. It's just probably not going to happen. So I would be surprised if that trend doesn't continue, where there's more of a recognition of senior ICs as being a really critical part of more companies. Um, but like certainly not the case everywhere. I think, you know, big tech is a really clear example. But there's a lot of other places that are starting to kind of go down that path. As I mentioned, Trainline have a great progression up into sort of principal levels as well at an IC, and there's a bunch of other companies I'm sure they're doing it. I'm sure David can tell you all about great companies who are doing this sort of thing as well.
I think the main thing I'd add with that as well is it's about owning your job search as well. So if you know you want this, do your research, connect with, network with the companies that you know that are doing it. So yeah, take a bit of control with that one. So that's cool. And two final questions. We are men of our word, Matt. We've done this.
We're gonna do it.
So Srini's asked two questions in one. This is putting the
Oh,
pressure
that's
on.
sneaky, man.
Although we may have touched on the second one already. So Srini was asking, what's the number of meetings per day a driver in moving back from manager to IC? You just have to say yes, don't you?
Yeah,
Surely.
it is a thing. I'm not going to disagree with that one. You have a lot less control over your calendar as a manager, and you do need to be in a lot more things. So as an IC, you can say no to a lot more stuff. But I think also as you become more senior, there's probably there's a lot more convergence between those two things. Like I'm in a lot of meetings as a senior IC, not as many as a manager, but definitely more than I was back in more junior IC levels. So
The future, man. We're just all going to just have meetings. The second question, we may have touched it, but I will ask just in case. But have you noticed if you've lost a step in terms of pace with the new kids getting tasks done because they've evolved with more recent dev tools, IDEs, concepts, and stuff like that? I would say we've got about 3 more years, and then Replit's just taking over, and we don't need any
that's it.
devs. So
Yeah,
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 keep the people skills, people.
yeah,
But yeah, could you speak to that, Matt, rather than me
yeah.
talking
I
rubbish?
think like to some extent, yes, but also I think that the question changes a bit when you become more senior. So you're more involved in thinking about how it should be done and what the right question to ask is, rather than can you write the code faster, better. Um, so yeah, I think, if you want to stay up and with the latest thing and, become a super code monster, then you might find it hard. You just got to do it basically and get involved. But I think it does change as you become more senior. It's like the emphasis is much less on how many lines of code you write and much more on, are you making good decisions? Are you able to guide things in the right direction?
Hey, awesome. Thank you so much. Got one question left. We've got 1 minute. This is easy. I'm multitasking here. Someone was asking for Morris's LinkedIn and he's been too shy to put it in there. So there we go for everyone at home. Matt's has just been posted. Don't follow me. Follow everyone else. Wicked. So last question from Charlotte. Nice little end there. Was there any support from your company at the time of moving from IC to manager that you found particularly useful? And I know Meta are very good at supporting people and training and stuff like that. So perhaps you could speak a little bit to the support you had and what worked.
Yeah, so I think when I became a manager, there was a program that you sort of went through where you could learn a lot about being a manager before actually committing to it. So that was really helpful, sort of talking through, examples of performance evaluation, thinking about road mapping, this sort of thing as well. And then they also ran a program for interns. So if you were a senior IC, you could manage an intern for a few months, and that gave you opportunity to try that out a little bit in a relatively low risk way. So I think being able to do some of it before you actually do it for real is really valuable. because as I said, like once you're in there, you've got so much to learn. Even having done a little bit before I became an actual manager, there was still tons to kind of get my head around. So yeah, it was. I would say anything you can do to try it out a little bit before you get into it is probably the best thing to do. Yeah.
Amazing stuff. We've gone 1 minute over, Matt. Can't
Oh
believe it. I was
no,
aiming for that two
almost.
o'clock on the nose,
All
man.
right.
So, mate, so good, so good. Great fun. Presentation was great. As you know,
Yeah.
I repeating myself a little bit, but your style of presentations is spot on. You know, really good cadence
Yeah.
and just good energy, man. Smashed through 13 questions, easy, light work for my boy Matt.
Right.
No messing. So yeah, thank you. Thank you personally. Thank you for everyone that's joined at home. And it's not just obviously this; it's preparing the presentation, it's thinking about what you want to cover and stuff like that. But I'll maybe come to you for the last word. How did that go? Were you happy with the session? Have you enjoyed it?
Great. Yeah. No, I really enjoyed that. And thank you so much for the opportunity as well. Really appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully make some new connections as well. And we can all catch up and talk some more about it. Yeah.
Good man, good man. Well, thank you all at home. Look forward to catching you at a future session. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll catch up soon. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.